live from South London. This is Mondo Murder Party. Welcome to tonight's episode, as entitled Rick Jones, bitch. Hope you all alright. So, there's a lot to get through tonight, so let's just get on with it. But I'm going to pop open the window, so hopefully anyone who's watching can tell me any of their particular comments. So, blah la la. Where do I pop this open to? Smooth as usual. I'm sure it'll all work itself out in the fullness of time. And I should have sorted out that loose bit before I came on air. Oh well. Right, so before anything else happens, the theme tune. So here it is. Ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-da. Well, make yourself a cup of tea as I go ahead and regale ye with stories of long boxes and tact. You search for the murder barons, you come back with a bloody green lantern. I mean, it's hardly Harriman's crazy cat. No, it's hardly Harriman's crazy cat. Good evening, Zach. Good evening, Kyle. Thank you for joining us on this illustrious return to the show. I'm choking myself out with my scarf here. That's not good, is it? I mean, it looks good visually, but bloody hell, I don't want to give out. Probably should have done that before I started the song. Hope it was alright. If it wasn't, I'm sure you'll let me know in your amusing commentary form. So, tonight's sponsor is a bit special, and as we all know, we have to have the hat for the sponsor. So, la la la. We have a hat put on slightly oddly. So yeah, the hairband expands the width of my head, so my hat cannot sit comfortably. So we'll have to hope that it shall not fall down in an unceremonious fashion. But I went looking on Instagram for the artworks because I quite like discovering new art and stuff, because it gives me hope, really. I quite like seeing, oh, people are cool, doing cool stuff. So, tonight's artwork, I got in touch with a lovely young lady called @GeorgieTees. And she does all kinds of lewds and nudes and stuff. And she wrote me a really nice note. So, yes. Here is an example of her kind of work. Now, we have to remember, me and this camera never get on particularly well, so I'm going to hold it up at the right angle. But she does things like this, which are very good. She's somewhere between like bawdy, saucy British postcards and like Frank Frazetta, I think. I've no idea if Frazetta is an influence on her, but she certainly nails the form, I think. I will post a screenshot of her Instagram in the post-show Fallout bump, so you can all go follow her. She has various exhibitions going on in her local town, and you can buy bits of her artwork from her directly. So yeah, it's all very good, and I like this kind of thing. This is probably the best piece of them all. She has cards, prints, paintings, nudity, and such. So yes, so that is @GeorgieTees, all lowercase, on the Instagrams, and there shall be more later. Hello Matthew, good to see you, whoever you are, wherever you are. I imagine, after the nearly 8 years of sobriety, Mr. Bowden, that my liver is probably a thing of shining, pristine joy. So, actually, they won't be betting to see who won't eat it, because it'll be great. That is a sarcastic allusion to a comment Mr. Bowden made about my weird dream that I depicted on Facebook earlier today. That was a weird one, but nobody really wants to hear about dreams, so I won't go off on it. I just wrote it down to get it out of my head, because my dreams get really big, and they haunt me unless I exercise them from my brain. So, now, before we get on to the main show, I need to say thank you to all of you. Well, some of you, not enough of you, if I'm honest. I have had an injured C7, which is a bit of your spine. It's a vertebrae, and I've been seeing a chiropractor to get it fixed, and on the whole I thought it was fixed, but I had a massive relapse last week, right, and I'm quite good with pain. Do you know what I mean? Like, I kind of am willing to just grin and bear a lot. So when I say this hurt a lot. This was like you're lying down in bed, yeah, and you're trying to get up because that's what people do when they wake up. They get up. Like, but if someone like drove an ice spike through your shoulder blade that pulsated with pain at random intervals, that's what that was like. And it was horrific. I couldn't think straight as much as you ever do, Nev's joke added here, right? So, booked an appointment with my friendly neighbourhood chiropractor, who is Paul Careless in Richmond. If anybody needs a good chiropractor, give me a shout, because he's very good. Went to Clapham Junction, found out my bank card wasn't working when I tried to buy some cigarettes, which was slightly like, what? Went to the cash machine, it was like, this transaction is declined, please contact your bank issue. What? So, went to the bank and said, what's going on? Oh, we cancelled your card because you're due a new one. I was like, okay, do you think maybe you should have told me that? And they went, oh yeah, we probably should. Like, okay, can I have some money? They're like, so, they gave me enough money to get by with. It's amazing what you can get away with if you're confident at a bank. But, I had to use my Patreon money to pay for my chiropractic treatment. Which was like, if you guys hadn't donated, I would have had no money to pay for it. And I would still probably be lying behind me, going, ow, quite a lot. Probably exacerbated from the fact that I'd have had to walk home from Richmond to Wandsworth, which is not a fun journey. It's a good hour's walk, even if you know what you're doing. So, thank you very much. You Patreon guys literally got me out of a lot of pain, and that's great, and I appreciate that very much. I had some offers of one-off payments to help, and genuinely, like, that is amazingly generous, and I appreciate that. I would say, like, rather than say to me, like, here is a lump sum, like, chuck us a couple of quid a month, and that way if that happens, like, it's there. At the moment, in the for the sake of full transparency, that money was being used to save up for my journey to America, which, according to the news, might not be very far away. And it'd be used to kind of like pay for food and stuff while I'm out in the States doing the two big things that I have planned. So, as it goes, if you fancy buying me noodles while I'm in a couple of bits America, I'll drop the link to my Patreon later on after the show, and you can go have a couple of quid. And like, people donating a couple of quid adds up. And like, again, if this happens again, it'd be really good to know. It's like, oh good, I'm not having to like scramble pennies from underneath the bed. So yes, the moment of gratitude and shameless begging over with. Let's get on with tonight's show. But before we do that, let's see what you amusing people have had to say. I'm now in glorious full colour. Did I do a black and white show? Because I should do. I'd love to do a black and white show. I like that kind of thing. Ba-ba-ba. Aha! So now, here we go. Watching and driving. Don't watch and drive, Fever. Holy moly. Waiting to see you break into a full Columbia solo. See, Kyle gets my aesthetic, right? Somewhere between Magenta from the Rocky Horror Picture Show and B. Arthur in the Star Wars Holiday Special, that's basically like my that's my aiming point. Because I think I've said this before, I think B. Arthur's musical number in Star Wars Holiday Special is the best bit in all the Star Wars. It is fantastic. It's like the Bertolt Brecht bit of Star Wars, where you just like, angry lady wants to finish work, loads of drunk blokes, here's a song. And like, sure, put it in space. It's still got its profundity and pathos and stuff. So, the big news of the week of the internet has been kind of two main things, really. I mean, I was going to get into the whole Red Sonja thing, but I think the people who caused that trouble in the first place have had a kind of maybe I was a bit of a twat. So I don't want to drag them through it, because if they've learnt their lesson, then they've learnt their lesson. But covers have been a big deal. You may have noticed. There was a bit of a furore, a bit of a tempest in a teacup regarding a salacious Marvel cover and what to be done about it. And the other thing that happened in comic news was the start of Mark Millar's Jupiter's Legacy adaptation on Netflix. I think it's on Netflix. I wouldn't swear to it, I haven't watched it yet. Didn't like the comic very much, to be honest. So I thought, well, I will try and intertwine these two concepts and bring us to tonight's show, which, as we have said previously, is Rick James' bitch. And this is how we do it. So, as a kid, I was into superheroes, obviously, as every indie comic fan never likes to say, like, because I go, I really like the works of Adrian Tomini. He's like, yeah, but when you were a kid, you had a long box full of Alpha Flight, and we both know it. And, so, my character that I was, what's the word I'm looking for? Disturbed by, right? Like, the one I didn't want to acknowledge, because I don't know why I didn't like it. I mean, we'll get to that. But, like, I really, really felt uncomfortable reading the Hulk. The Hulk. This is one of my favourite things that was ever published. It's the Panini book, which reprints the first issues of the Jack Kirby and Stan Lee Hulk stuff. What has it got now? I can't remember now. Oh, it's the first 6 issues anyway. It's very good. And the Hulk is not a character I like to think about very much, because the Hulk's whole shtick is obviously unresolved anger issues result in build-up of psychological pressure, which leads to explosions in another personality, and then all kinds of chaos and destruction are laid waste, and then a regular person has to kind of live with it and be the face of that damage and destruction. That would be my life, but also the basic concept of the Hulk. So, damn it, I should have got my pile ready. 2 shakes of a rattlesnake while I decompress from that psychological confession. That's why I'm not overly fond of the Hulk. Is that the last one? Is that the last one? That's the last one. Right, okay, let's see if I can slip this down without you seeing what I'm doing. So, one of the more remarkable comics that happened in the late 80s, early 90s was The Hulk, as written by Peter David. And the reason I really like Peter David's one is, unlike 90% of any superhero comic from any period, the Hulk deals with consequences, and it deals with the fallout of things and what happens when you do this. It's a remarkable work because it's this real... It jumps off the Bill Mantlo introduced but probably actually Barry Windsor Smith idea that the Hulk's rage is a gamma manifestation of Bruce's anger towards his dad. In case you're wondering, I haven't read my copy of Monsters yet, because, precisely because of those reasons. I'm not sure I'm ready to go that in depth into it just yet. It's going to be like a save that one for the plane ride, you know. But so Peter David says, right, okay, look, there are a number of myriad psychological conflictions with the Hulk. Why don't we, instead of running the same theme over and over again, because how many times can you run from the army and blah, blah, and like Bruce isn't the Hulk and the Hulk isn't Bruce and somebody else becomes the Hulk. Peter David starts resolving things and starts to explore exactly what the relationship between Bruce and Betty and the Hulk, who is his own psychological entity, is. And it's a murderer's row of really good artists on that work as well. So you've got like Jeff Purves, and then you've got Todd McFarlane, and you've got Dale Keown, and Gary Frank, and Liam Sharp, and Adam Kubert, who is the final person to do it. And it also contains one of my favourite comics of all time. It's one of those like psychological issue books that have come up since I started doing this, where like I will buy multiple copies of it just in case, right? And this is one of my favourite comics of all time. It's also, I think, one of the funniest comics ever published. And it's Hulk 417, which is the Rick Jones stag do. At this point in the comic, Rick, having gone through quite a lot with Marlowe, is about to get married to Marlowe, who for a short time was going out with the Hulk. When the Hulk was Miss Fix-It and working as a bruiser, bouncer in Las Vegas. Long story, but the essence of it is Rick and Marlowe have got together, they're going to get married, and this is the stag party which Captain America has organised, but there are words that he is not entirely clear on the meaning of. And it's just a gorgeous thing. It's genuinely funny, and it makes me smile every time I think of the bit with Rick Jones on the surfboard. So it's good fun. And the issue that follows it, which is the wedding of Rick and Marlowe, is one of the sweetest things in the world. And I'm not normally a fan of gimmick covers, but the gimmick cover, if you got the direct edition, was the thing popped open, like it was a gatefold, but only the front of it, so it was like a church door opening like that. It was very cool, and it's very sweet. And it was just genuinely good stuff. And by that point, the Hulk and Bruce and Grey Hulk have psychologically assimilated to themselves. So they are all one being working in action. But what if they're not? And I think at this point we'd also met the Maestro. And that's one of those things that Marvel or DC don't like doing, which is a potential ending. Where in that future, the Future Imperfect books by Peter David and George Perez, Bruce finds out that will become extremely bitter towards humanity and becomes the Maestro, who is the evil Hulk, and he ends up running the place. And that's where everything's going, unless the Hulk starts changing things. In the end, Peter David would leave the Hulk with issue 467, which, now, I was reading about this earlier today. The argument was Betty was going to become pregnant if she wasn't pregnant at the time, and Marvel were not interested in that idea, because if Betty became a mother, I didn't write this, I'm just relaying, Betty became a mother, all interest in her character would go, because mothers can't be interesting characters. And Peter David said something along the lines of, that's a really stupid way of looking at women. And they went, okay, 467 is your last issue, don't let the door hit you on the arse on the way out. So he wrote this final issue, and it's one of the most bitter goodbyes to a comic you'll ever read. Like, because, you know, by that time he'd done over 100 issues. Yeah, 467, 367. I think he jumped on around the 330 mark, I wouldn't swear to it, but he'd done a fair whack, and including specials, he'd done well, approaching 150 issues of the Hulk over a very long period of time. And it's just a recap of what would have happened if Peter David had stayed on the book, with so much shade, as the young people say. There had already been a continuous argument with Peter and the Marvel offices that they wanted savage, rag, smash stuff Hulk. And Peter was like, that character's clearly gone way beyond that stage now. And there were even two Hulks at one point during the whole Heroes Reborn debacle, where there was our Hulk, who we'd known for years and years, and there was smashed off Hulk in Jim Lee's Iron Man book. So yeah, he left. And in that time, things were not great for Marvel. That takes us around up to the Chapter 11 bankruptcy thing, and Marvel kind of being beholden to the debts of Ron Perlman, not the actor from Hellboy. And everything's getting a number 1, or an anniversary edition, or a die-cut cover, or an embossed cover, a glow-in-the-dark cover, a scratch-and-sniff cover, glow-in-the-dark fur cover. Scratch-and-sniff did actually happen. I'm not making that up. Not on a Marvel book, it was like a Harley Quinn annual. Like, I'm sure I made a video about that, but yeah, there was genuinely a scratch and sniff. So, I feel like the ultimate lol book that encapsulates just how bad things were for Marvel at that time were just after the Clone Saga finished in Peter Parker Spider-Man 75, where Aunt May comes back to life. Marvel finally being able to laugh at themselves after, God, at least 5 years of all this malarkey, put out a book called 101 Ways to End the Clone Saga. Because the actual ending of the Clone Saga is something worthy of its own video, and there's a particular page that I really want to do a reading of, because it's one of those things where you go like, someone was paid to write these words. You know, it's like someone wrote this thinking, yep, that's the best version of this, and an editor looked at it and went, yep, that's acceptable. And yeah, it's a terrible thing, but this is quite a good laugh. It's basically like, what could we have done to rescue the thing? And the answer is nothing. Nothing, because the problem with the Clone Saga was there was never one end point. Like, the editors would change hands and people would say, oh, you need to do this on this book. So that's quite a good a good point to pause before we move on to the next bit, because things like get better from here. Holy moly! So we're going to see what you guys are saying. So, guys, if I'm making the show, don't message me. Scratch and sniff happened on Ren and Stimpy. Yeah, see, I've got a Ren and Stimpy one, but I've never taken it out the bag. Because, like, it's a Ren and Stimpy #1. So things get better after that. Like, Heroes Reborn goes, you know, doesn't go the way Marvel thought it would. They thought they were going to reclaim the whole business, and they didn't. And everything kind of came crashing down. They filed for Chapter 11, but the good thing they had going on was they had Joe Quesada as the Marvel Knights editor. And apparently they had to fight quite a lot of distrust in the Marvel audiences because Marvel office. Marvel's editorial staff had already felt quite bitter about the Heroes Reborn thing, because it was essentially Marvel saying that the people we have aren't good enough, so we're going to outsource it. And Heroes Reborn as a sales thing started really, really well, obviously. But as books were late, as the attention to the project died because it wasn't a new thing anymore, it kind of just petered out and everyone was waiting for Heroes Return, which was alright. Like, it's good superhero comics, but it wasn't the thing. And what Quesada brought to the thing, to Marvel, was his connection. So obviously Kevin Smith writing Daredevil is quite a big deal, and the revitalized Black Panther, and the Inhumans was under the Marvel Knights shtick. And there was also the weird Punisher miniseries where he hunted demons. They weren't all winners, but Joe's work was basically strong enough that they said, okay, look, now this is the reason given, and it sets a worrying precedent that ought to be looked back upon. Bob Harris was the editor of Marvel during these tough times, and he was let go. And there are a number of reasons that could allude to why he would be let go, but the reason given was his failure to exploit and translate the success of the X-Men movies into sales on the comics. Now that's a hell of a thing, because, you know, if you look at the last 20 years of Hollywood, it's basically been a running advert for Marvel properties. Then you look at the sales figures of Marvel Comics. But anyway, that's just a little observation. So, Joe Quesada, in tandem with a chap called Bill Gemmers, take over Marvel. And they do a... Like, as far as I'm concerned, Gemmers and Quesada are the last golden age of Marvel. Like, that short period, I think it's like 2000 to 2003, maybe a bit less. They really, like, made Marvel interesting again. So they went out and they got Straczynski, Michael Straczynski, to take over Spider-Man, and my god, that was needed. Because after the Clone Saga, there were a couple of years of Spider-Man where they're like, no, look, he's Peter Parker again, please read this comic. He's like, yeah, but you still gotta make it good. You know what I mean? Like, just bringing Peter Parker back ain't enough. You've got a lot of trust to earn back. And Straczynski, out of the bat, nailed that Spider-Man book. And they put together the Ultimates projects, which was Ultimate Spider-Man by Bendis and Ultimate X-Men by Mark Millar. We'll mention his name again quite soon. What else did we have? We had the Shattered Stories story by Richard Corbin about the Hulk. And we had a Hulk Smash by Garth Ennis and John McCrea. There's the obligatory John McCrea reference of the show. A whole slew of stuff as represented here. So these were a great idea. Marvel did a thing at this period because they decided they weren't going to overprint anymore. There would be the amount ordered by the retailers, and that would be it. So instead of reprinting the comic, they would do these little bundles called the Mighty Marvel Must-Haves, where you could pick up the key issues. So this one reprints. This is Amazing Spider-Man 36, which is the 9/11 issue, and Incredible Hulk 34, which is the first issue of Bruce Jones and John Romita Jr. And while Peter David is my favourite Hulk writer, the Bruce Jones run is the tits. It's flipping great. So I highly recommend that. There's Daredevil 26, which is the beginning of the Brian Michael Bendis run, where the running joke with Matt Murdock has always been, if he sees a pretty girl, he's going to tell her he's Daredevil pretty soon. And all that comes back to bite him on the arse. Where, like, Matt does get outed as Daredevil, and it wrecks his life, and he goes Looney Tunes. At one point, he ends up taking out the Kingpin, and then goes, well, I'm going to be the Kingpin then. And he takes over the Hand as well. So, like, Matt's the crime boss of New York, and he's got ninjas enforcing his rules. It's lots of fun, and, like, again, another comic that really needed the shot in the arm. Like, Kevin Smith getting all those new people reading Daredevil was good work with Joe Quesada, and then you got the David Mack issues with Echo, and then after a bit more you get this stuff. And there's X-Men Evolution, which I can't genuinely remember. I think it's an adaptation of the cartoon of the time. So they're not all winners, but this is a good one. And we have another one. Oh yeah, this is a banger. This is probably quite timely and topical. So this is a reprint of Truth, Red, White and Black by Kyle Baker, which was fairly contentious, and I genuinely thought this would be a bigger deal, and it should have been a bigger deal. But it was a suggestion that when they created the Super Soldier Serum, which Steve Rogers ended up with, there was no way that Steve was the first person to get that. And they probably would have tried it out on black soldiers because they would have been considered dispensable. And this is the story of the first Captain America, the black one. Really worth reading. And it relates to a lot of stuff that happens now, but it's cracking stuff. This also has Captain America #1, which is the it's the America Fuck Yeah run. Like, it's post 9/11, and it's this huge, beautiful John Cassidy artwork, but it is very much by war bonds. Lots of strong American iconography and eagles and shit, and it's kind of awkward. I mean, but I'm not an American, so it just looks a bit. It seemed to set the path for all those post 9/11 Marvel comics, which seem to feature an incredible amount of crying firemen, and you're like, okay, look, I get it. And this also contains the Ultimates #1, as in Mark Millar and Brian Hitch's Ultimates #1, which was quite a big deal, as you may remember. Perhaps shipping more than once every 6 months would have made it keep as a big deal, because we will get to the theme of this soon. But one of my big problems with comic creators is the disconnect that they have with the actual customers. So what seems to be the illusion of the general public is if you're behind a counter in a comic shop, you are connected to everything. Like, you have the ability to justify and explain anything, and that means if the Ultimates or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, for example, are late, then you've got Alan Moore's phone number, and you can just say, like, look, I've got an irate customer wanting to know when the new League is. When's that going to be? Is it going to be next week? Like, we didn't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we just didn't know much about anything beyond what was in Diamond previews and stuff. So yeah, like, when you had stuff... Okay, so the most apocryphal example of this was about a decade ago when Dan Slott decided to kill Spider-Man for Christmas. Thanks, Dan. And before that, we had the... And I've probably made this more of a thing than it needed to be. The frightening flashback sequence where Pete is trapped in Dr. Octopus's body and he's going through Otto's memories. And he remembers when Otto and May had sex before the marriage. And this is Amazing Spider-Man. And now, here's that thing again. Like, if Dan Slott wants to do the whole convention circuit and stuff and deal with parents and stuff, he can. Like, he can, and he does. But he doesn't have to. Doesn't have to at all. Never has to pretend to show in his life. Can just stay home and go, good luck with all that. Whereas guys who work in comic shops, yeah, we kind of have to be there, so we're behind the counter and we have to explain this stuff. Yeah, and the other one was like, God, there was a free comic book day I ran, and I'd been up really late at the shop setting up for the next morning because I knew it was going to be a war zone, so I just wanted to make sure, like, the Friday night, that every last thing could be handled before the punters came in. And it wasn't until the Saturday morning when I got there super early, just in case. I think I was waiting for, like, the cosplayer to shop, and I started flicking through the books just because I wanted to say, oh, I should probably, know. And I opened up the Attack on Titan free comic, and it had a swear word in it. I look at, thanks for the warning, guys. So yeah, there's Brian Hibbs of Comics Experience, a legendary comic shop in San Francisco, invited a Marvel, member of Marvel staff. I can't remember what his position is off the top of my head, but just as a kind of like, you guys need to see exactly what it is on our end, so you understand why we order things the way we do, why we rack things the way we do, the questions we have to ask, how back issues work. I think that was the last great intersection, because after that there's retailer meetings which were meant to be let us the publishers and you the retailers converse on how we can make things better, and somehow that converted into some kind of weird timeshare thing where Marvel, particularly, are really bad for this, would just explain what their variant programs would be for an hour and a half, and then you get some variants for attending. And you're like, that's not really conducive to actually understanding how this works. So yeah, like, genuinely, I would like to see a greater connection between publishers and retailers as a kind of like you have to understand what happens on each other's side. Anyway, tangent over. Holy moly, that's a lot of notifications. So before I move on to the next bit, let's see what you lot are saying. Shampampala. Okay, so that's just stuff about other things, and my cousin sending me a selfie. Thank you, I'm doing a show. So, another great thing from that Marvel period was Pete Milligan and Mike Allred. They took over X-Force, and the letters they got are a video on their own. Like, as some of you might have seen over the weekend, I'm putting together a run of the Goon, because I do genuinely think there's a video to be made on why single issues are better than trade paperbacks, because you get the letters pages, and some letters pages are absolute works of art. So X-Force ran for a bit, and then it got a relaunch as Ecstatics. By which point, the people wanting, art that doesn't feature feet, those people had calmed down, and this is just a beautiful run of X-Men books. And I'm not an X-Men person, I'm a Michael Rid and Pete Milligan person. Yeah, there's the thing. If you promote your comics, try to use the creators rather than the resale value as your selling point. And that way you get more readers. And if you get more readers, you get more regular customers because they're coming for the next episode rather than, can I resell this thing? Anyway. So yeah, Ecstatics, if you've not heard of this, this is the X-Men book which is about the nature of celebrity. There aren't very many regular X characters in there, like Wolverine pops in for a bit. This is when we first meet Dupe. Characters die at an alarming rate as well. But yeah, this is... Oh, of course, and Ecstatics is famous, or infamous, because it was going to be the comic that featured Princess Diana as a recurring character. And then a certain comic columnist let Buckingham Palace know what was happening, and then, I can testify because I was there, a member of the royal family's, I don't know what the right word is, but their advisors, their legal team, something like that, they came to visit us at Comic Showcase and said, do you have the Princess Diana comic? And we're like, no, it's not out for another 2 months, it's still in the solicitation process. So said royal person took away a couple of previews, and the next thing we know, Princess Diana wasn't in the X-Men anymore. So good work, one more thing you screwed up. Anyway, also, again, this is the Mighty Marvel Must Have Hulk 34 to 36, which is the first 3 issues of the Bruce Jones run. Return of the Monsters, just a cracking Hulk run. It's like Amazing Spider-Man, in that it's a really good Marvel run drawn by John Romita Jr., and then Mike Deodato Jr. takes over, and somehow it all goes very badly. And I don't know why that is, but it's a thing that's true. Sorry, Mike, and your studio. And we also got Tangled Web, and I really love Tangled Web. Tangled Web was basically the Legends of the Dark Knight of the Spider-Man world, where they just said, like, look, we know you're not going to do 6 issues, or a year's worth of comics, or whatever, but would you like to do 2 or 3 issues, and you can tell the story in whatever form you like. So you had Raven, as in the ECW, WCW, XPW, WWE, etc. wrestler. He wrote an issue which is one of the greatest continuity implants ever. Like, it adds something to the mythos of Spider-Man, but if I tell you anything beyond that, it will spoil it. But it's a beautiful thing. You had Paul Pope do an issue, you had the much celebrated Eduardo Risso and Brian Azzarello issue, which is issue 4. The story of the Kingpin's henchmen. Those two were really hot on 100 Bullets at the time, so getting them to do the Tangled Web was a corker. You had Pete Milligan again, and Duncan Fegredo, who is one of the best comic artists ever. They did a story called I Was a Teenage Frogman, which was the story of the Frogman's son and the grief he got at school because his dad was the Frogman. It's just horrifically cruel and very, very good. And unfortunately doesn't get enough recognition. Equally is the Darwin Cook issue of Tangled Web. This is just the most beautiful Archie Darwin Cook kind of thing. I say Archie because in Archie Andrews, and it's just this really sweet story. Darwin did 2 issues. Like, if you don't know Darwin Cook, that guy was just... You don't want to set a standard for what comic art should look like, because obviously it is a medium open to a number of interpretations, and all of those are absolutely valid. But if you want someone who represents the innocent Americana and this kind of style that was first popularized by the likes of Bruce Timm and Mike Paraback, Darwin Cook was the man. There were not enough comics by him. There's 2 issues of this. There's New Frontier, which is the DC series about the Justice League. There's the issue of Justice League New Frontier, which features Gloria Steinem and Wonder Woman. And Twilight Children with Gilbert Hernandez writing, and a few issues of The Spirit for DC. Darwin, God bless his soul, that guy was just the peak of the form. And then, sorry, I got a bit emotional there. I did love Darwin's work very much. Then, so Kevin Smith was meant to write first he was meant to be writing Amazing Spider-Man, and then he wasn't, and then he was doing a Spider-Man mini-series with Terry Dodson called Spider-Man Black Cat, The Evil That Men Do. And they got up to issue 3, I think, and then there was quite a long period of time between 3 and 4. And the story that started off as this like kind of friendly bump around between Pete and the Black Cat, and it was like this fun, charming little thing, and then it turned into heroin and rape. And I don't know if that was a reason for the delay, because it was quite a dark turn. But in the interim, Terry Dodson was kind of left hanging out his arse, waiting to go like, I kind of need to do some work. So, enter, stage left, Mark Millar, who did a Spider-Man series, which is the most, it's like the most pastiche Spider-Man series ever. He just went like, here are all the tropes you can expect in a Spider-Man story. Let's run with that. So, Norman Osborn is the big bad, Aunt May's in trouble, there's sexual tension between Pete, Mary Jane and the Black Cat, and Terry Dodson draws 11 of the 12 issues, and Frank Cho does a fill-in. Like, it's not very well remembered, but I really like this. This is just like easy Spider-Man. It's like, yeah, you start from here, okay? You'll know who Pete is pretty soon, and yeah, if you want just how to get into Spider-Man, it's a good read. So all this is going on. Marvel are having an Indian summer. They have a plethora of books, and one of the things that backs all this up is that Bill Gemmers and Joe Quesada are what we as wrestling fans called talking smack. They have somehow positioned themselves as a plucky underdog against DC's evil AOL monolith, and they are running their mouths on everything, and it's kind of fun, to be honest. Going back, I was reading, this is probably like one of the most self-indulgent books ever published, but there was a book published in 2003, and this is it, and it's called Marvel Year in Review 2000 to 2001, Fanboys and Bad Girls, Bill and Joe's Marvelous Adventure. And it's basically them saying, please pay us $30 to read how good we were. So it's an overview of stuff, but it does recount a number of their particular fracas. And while most of them are with DC, there's a couple in-house. There's one argument they have with John Byrne over a series called X-Men The End, where John and Chris Claremont were going to do the final X-Men story, and then they didn't. And the other one is with Peter David. Now, one of the things that Joe did, along with a number of initiatives, which I do genuinely believe were really beneficial, and the last big hoo-ha, but the thing I think that really worked for Joe and Bill was they pushed Marvel Comics as content. They said, like, okay, let's get Grant Morrison to write X-Men. Let's get Straczynski on Spider-Man, right? Bruce Jones on Hulk. Who are good writers? There is a story that I would like someone to clarify. I believe it to be true. I've heard it from a number of sources, but if anyone related to the story can verify this, then please do. The story I have heard is the initial person that Joe Quesada wanted for writing Spider-Man was Robert Crumb. As in that Robert Crumb, yes, that one. And it's like, obviously that's mad, but it would have sold. Like, because Spider-Man will sell a certain amount regardless, just because there are people who have to have every Spider-Man comic. But then you would have had all the Crumb fans, and then you would have had all the people just going like, Robert Crumb writing Amazing Spider-Man. Now, what I've heard is Peter Bagg, who edited Weirdo after Robert Crumb gave up the gig, said to Marvel, I can get Robert Crumb. And this didn't happen for whatever reason. And to make up for this, Peter Bagg ended up doing the Megalomaniacal Spider-Man, which is apparently the worst-selling Spider-Man comic of all time. I know the Spider-Man comic I just mentioned does exist, because I have a couple of copies. And there was a Hulk story that he did ended up in the second series of Strange Tales. But yeah, because otherwise, like, why did that happen? I mean, I like Pete Bag, but why does that become its own comic rather than just an issue of Tangled Web? It's a weird one, and one I hope that we get to the bottom of at some point in this show. Anyway, one of the other things they do is they say, look, we have a lot of comics that just ain't making us any money. Like, we're putting them out at $2.25, and it's literally not worth the cost of printing them. So, as they're low-selling books, we're going to jack them up to $3, because the fans who buy them are obviously loyal, so they'll pay the extra 75 cents. And one of those books was Captain Marvel. So, when Peter David left the Hulk, he took Marlowe and Rick, who are clearly his favourite characters, with him to this new title, Captain Marvel, because Rick becomes the host body for Captain Marvel. Long story. But he gets to carry on the Rick and Marlowe soap opera, because it's quite fun. Apparently you can do fun marriage comics. Who knew? Marvel, one more day, not letting that one go. Anyway, so Peter is like, if you put up my comic like this, it's going to kill it, because that extra 75 cents is not going to be something people spring to. So this goes back and forth via various trade publications and the internet, and Peter's own column called But I Digress, which was running in Comic Buyer's Guide at the time. And then things got wacky, right? Because Joe makes the counterpoint, like, yeah, look, you can have a new issue one, right, at the price, but you're going to have to take some criticism on board. Like, a lot of your comic is very in-jokey, and it's joking to your own audience about your own material, and like, people don't get it. It's not very accessible, because, you know, if I say Captain Marvel, the amount of things any number of people could be thinking at the saying those words, there's a multitude. There's, you know, the obvious Captain Marvel from the films, but there's also Captain Marvel who is now Shazam. There's Monica Rambeau, who is a Captain Marvel. I mean it's endless, and you know, I'm never going to do the Captain Marvel mythology thing, because it's big and it's ridiculous. In this instance, this Captain Marvel is the son of the Captain Marvel who died in the 1970s. Right, that's all you need to know. But there's so much mythology and lore to cop through, and Joe rightly says, who can understand this? Because their whole thing was, we want anyone to be able to pick up one of our books and go, I get this. Right? And they did a number of things to do that. So yeah, you can have an issue one at the normal price, but change the book so it's a bit more accessible to new readers. A fair compromise, I think. However, enter stage left Bill Gemmers, who, man, it's one of the worst decisions ever made. Like, I will credit Bill for a lot of what was said about kicking over the table of what was the status quo of comics at the time, and he said a lot of things in the book I just showed you which hold up now about the small-mindedness and the clubhouse mentality of comics. But man, this was a bad call. So somehow Captain Marvel #1 is going to happen, but Bill decides, well, how hard can it be to write a comic? So he says, we're going to do a thing called You Decide. So you're going to have your Captain Marvel #1, and out of nowhere, we're going to do another story as part of the Ultimate Universe, which is people can submit their own creations to the Ultimate Universe and be part of the story if they want, called Ultimate Adventures, which is basically a knockoff of Batman, and it's drawn by Duncan Fegredo. That's the saving grace. That's as much as we need to know about Ultimate Adventures. But also Bill decides he's going to do his own comic. I don't know if you, the audience, have ever tried writing a comic, but it's not as easy as you might think once you start going into panel descriptions and the page count and how you're going to do this and how much time you actually have per story and how time works in a comic. Even if you don't have the experience, like, if you've got a good story, I think a good artist will save you. Like, Kevin Smith's early comics are obviously heavily wordy, And then as time went on, and he did those issues of Daredevil, and then went on to do Green Arrow, he got a handle on it. And because the material, right, was strong enough, that inexperience with the form of writing comics was covered because he had people like Joe Quesada and Phil Hester on Green Arrow. So he's fine. Bill Gemmers did not have that material. Okay? He did not. He could have had the best technical expertise in the world, but sweet monkey on a Christmas tree, Marvel is genuinely, like, just... When you're resorting to bad girl art, and even the bad girl art is awful, to flog your book, you are done. Life is not long enough to recap the insanity and incompetence that is this book, but it's rubbish. I don't like to use objective analysis when talking about art because all opinions are obviously subjective, but my god, man, if he had just been president of Marvel guy, he would have been fine, but his whole shtick was like, do you know what, I didn't care what the accountants at Marvel told me. This was a story that needed to be told, and I did it. And it starts off of a parody of Smallville, hence the title, Marville. You see what they did. And like, I can name every Green Goblin without trying. I don't know what this man is talking about with these references. It's so referencey heavy, and Rush Limbaugh's in there, and it's a parody of Ted Turner. It's also about the idea that evolution is rubbish, but creationism is real, and also Iron Man's in there, and he's a racist. And I swear to God, these things all happen in this comic, which changes genre and mood in the same way that I change, like, t-shirts, you know? Like, it just doesn't hold together, and like, where is this possibly going? Funny you should ask. So, there are 7 issues to this comic. Issues 1 to 6 are... I mean, in that things happen in a sequence of events, it's a story, right? Like, semantically, this Marvel comic is a story. And then in issue 6, it's revealed that this has all been a work all along, because the real reason we are doing Marvel versus Captain Marvel versus Ultimate Adventures, because only one of these books would stand at the end, right? There would only, once all 6 months had gone by, there would only be one remainder, and obviously that book with Captain Marvel. But Bill knew this all along. Like, he knew he was only going to do 6 issues, so it was going to be over. And Ultimate Adventures turned out to be a 6-issue miniseries. But Bill's grand plan was, having entranced the comic reading public to how easy it would be to do a good comic by proving it with how good Marvel was, he would then restart the forgotten Marvel imprint called Epic, where people would be free to submit their ideas to do Epic, which would be kind of a creator-owned part of Marvel. So issue 7 of Marvel is not a comic. It's a submissions guideline as a comic. It's not quite as cheeky as the official Marvel tryout book, where Marvel had the balls to charge potential artists $13 for essentially an application form. But my god, please buy this comic, which is literally a contract. Like, oh, what? So Epic happens. And here we come to the cover bit of the story, because, you know, like, if you're in a situation where you've got Frank Cho to draw the cover because Frank's cover is less offensive than what you've gone with initially, you might have done something wrong. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the second printing variant by Frank Cho to Trouble. It is, with a fair amount of evaluation, a lavacious overly sexualized cover featuring teenage girls pouting in a breasty manner at a mirror. Right? This is Frank Cho doing peak on brand Frank Cho. I think he just joined up with them because there were some issues with Liberty Meadows, so he was doing a run of Mighty Avengers, and he was going to be their new like hyper cover boy, whatever. The reason this is the less salacious variant is because Mark Millar, damn it, that man is determined to get the comics retailers into trouble. Like, most recently, he was a massive, advocate for Brexit. And, you know, if you don't know what Brexit and the fall of the pound has done to comics retail in the last 5 years, go do some research. Okay, I'm not going to go into it now, I don't want to go into a whole Brexit thing, but the facts are the pound dropped significantly, it did a lot of damage against the dollar, so therefore comics had to be more expensive, a lot of shops couldn't handle that. Okay, that's just facts, that's not whether I'm on the side of it or not, that's just a thing that happened, and it's a thing that Mark Millar advocated heavily. Before that, he did that whole Miller World thing, right, which was, as you might or might know, Miller's foray into self-publishing. Not self-publishing, he had a number of titles across various publishers. There was going to be Run, which was a Flash knockoff with Ashley Wood, which I believe eventually became MPH with Duncan Fegredo again. There was Wanted, which was a Society of Secret Supervillains, or whatever the hell they're called, book for DC that was reconfigured into its own thing. The movie is rubbish, the only good thing in it is naked Angelina Jolie, the rest forget about it. What was the other one? There was Chosen, which is probably the best of them, which is now called American Jesus, which is exactly what it sounds like. The resurrection of Christ happens in the mid-80s in America, drawn by Peter Gross, which was originally published by Dark Horse. I think it's at Image now, but I won't swear to it. There was War Heroes with Tony Harris, which is superpowered soldiers in Iraq. And there's one which, you know, it's going to be a video once I find all 4 issues. And it's an interesting one because it doesn't seem to exist on millerworld.com anymore. Not since I checked this afternoon. But there's a book he did for Avatar called The Unfunnies, which looked like your classic, lovely Tex Avery, Hanna-Barbera art thing, but it's actually about a town that gets infected by... Do you know what? We'll go into it another time. But man, those covers were trouble. And before that, we have Trouble. And the reason Trouble will always be contentious is because it claims to be the real secret origin of Spider-Man, where 2 couples, Richard and Mary, and Ben and May, have a summer fling and an adventure, and May gets pregnant. And at the end of the story, May, who cannot handle looking after a baby because she's too young, decide to give the child to Richard and Mary to look after. And the kid never knows this, obviously, so this child believes that Richard and Mary are his real parents. His kid's name is Peter. It was out of print for a hell of a long time, as you might imagine, because obviously the idea that Peter Parker is literally, semantically correctly, a bastard, not very kid-friendly. And just to compound all this, you want to know what the covers for Trouble look like? You know what us guys behind the counter had to sell to the public? Oh, try this. Alright, thanks Mark. Here are some teenage girls. I believe they're teenage, I wouldn't swear to it, but they certainly look teenage, in some bikinis. Was issue 1 not enough? Okay, oh, this one's signed by Mark, thanks everyone. That's fine, because we're going to make it a regular thing. Do you know how regular we're going to make it? Try issue 2. How's that for you? No? How about issue 3? issue 4. And finally, issue 5. Now, this kind of imagery does not go unnoticed next to lots of issues of drawn superheroes looking heroic and stuff. Things were said. I'm fairly shameless when it comes to reading comics on the train, but even I, the man without shame, the once forgotten boy, was like, do you know what? I'm gonna save this for when I get home. And that is how we get Jupiter's Legacy and the cover Spandangles together. So that has been tonight's show, except for tonight's reading. Because I've been seeing some, you know, that whole Red Sonja thing, it kind of disturbed me a bit, if I'm honest. It brought out a side of the comics industry that I tend not to think exists, because it's kind of embarrassing that that mindset exists. I found something that I thought was related, and it's from one of my favourite books. So tonight we are going to finish on a reading from one of the best books ever written in the 20th century. And that book is Hollywood Babylon by Kenneth Anger. If you have never read this, I highly urge you to do so. It's one of the style definers. It's the beginning of the documentation of the fall of celebrity culture. And this is a piece regarding Rudolph Valentino, who, as you might imagine, is someone I happen to admire quite a lot. So yes, there's certainly a alpha male contingent of comics who want to keep the comics as their male clubhouse, who don't like things outside of the heteronormative bit of the spectrum, and would like to keep comics being for white men, with women just being sex trophies with tits made of bubblegum and stuff. I don't like it. You know what I mean? Like, as far as I'm concerned, comics it ain't a clubhouse, man. It's a commune, and it's for everyone. And if there are characters that don't represent you, then there should be. And the backlash to the casting of Red Sonja was just some troglodyte racist crap. And I don't like it. I don't like the demonization of the word woke to mean some kind of ridiculous tolerance for anything outside of you and your friends. Alright, it's the idea that you're aware of the existence of other people, and that their problems and their representation are as valid and as important as you. And if what you are bringing to the table is, traditionally this fictional character was a white woman, so therefore this fictional character has to be played by a white woman, then you're an idiot racist, and fuck you, and die. Because you are a dinosaur, sprawling in the tar pit, waving angrily with your tiny claws at the evolution that is happening in front of you. And I hope you die soon, because you're in the way. You are one more element that adds hate and intolerance to the world. You ain't doing any good. This world is going to be better the more we acknowledge that everyone has an equal right to representation and to a platform and to have their voice heard. And your desire for Red Sonja to be a white woman, like, you know what, you got 50 years of white Red Sonja comics, you ain't missing out on nothing. Just go read those. Go stop living in the past, because you're embarrassing. You're embarrassing. You make us all look bad. And people think all comic fans are like that, and we're not. Like, we ain't you. This was published in the July 18, 1926 edition of the Chicago Tribune, and it's called Pink Powder Puffs. A new public ballroom was opened on the north side a few days ago. A truly handsome place, and apparently well run. The pleasant impression lasts until one steps into the men's washroom and finds there on the wall a contraption of glass tubes and levers and a slot for the insertion of a coin. The glass tubes contain a fluffy pink solid, and beneath them one reads an amazing legend which runs something like this. Insert coin. Hold personal puff between the tube, then pull the lever. A powder vending machine in a men's washroom. Homo Americanus. Why didn't somebody quietly drown Rudolph Giuliano alias Valentino years ago? And was the pink powder machine pulled from the wall and ignored? It was not. It was used. We personally saw two men, as young lady contributors to the Voice of the People are wont to describe the breed, step up, insert coin, hold kerchief beneath the spout, pull the lever, and then take the pretty pink stuff and pat it on their cheeks in front of the mirror. Another member of this department, one of the most benevolent men on earth, burst raging into the office the other day because he had seen a young man combing his pomaded hair in the elevator. But we claim our pink powder sweet story beats his all hollow. It is time for a matriarchy, if the male of the species allows such things to persist. Better a rule by masculine women than by effeminate men. Man began to slip, as we are beginning to believe, when he discarded the straight razor for the safety pattern. We shall not be surprised when we hear that the safety razor has given way. Who or what is to blame is what puzzles me. Is this degeneracy a cognate reaction with pacifism to the virilities and realities of the war? Are pink powder and parlour pinks in any way related? How does one reconcile masculine cosmetics, shakes, floppy pants and slave bracelets, with a disregard for law and an aptitude for crime more in keeping with the frontier of half a century ago than a 20th century metropolis? Do women like the type of man who pats pink powder on his face in a public washroom and arranges his coiffure in a public elevator? Do women at heart belong to the Wilsonian era of "I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier"? What has become of the old caveman line? It is a strange social phenomenon, and one that is running its course not only here in America, but in Europe as well. Chicago may well have its powder puffs. London has its dancing men, and Paris its gigolos. Down with Dechter, up with Elon Glein. Hollywood is the national school of masculinity. Rudy, the beautiful gardener's boy, is the prototype of the American male. Hell's Bells and Old Sugar. That was written in 1926. Should be obsolete by now, but it ain't. That is tonight's show. Thank you for watching Mondo Murder Party Rick James bitch. As I said, to get hold of Georgie's artwork shown in the advert section, you should check out @GeorgieTees on Instagram. If you would like to donate to my Patreon, please donate to my Patreon. I will put a link in at the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Mondo Funny Books. I have been Filthy Nevs. Good night, and God bless wherever you are. Blah blah blah.